Hi, everybody. Today's Friday, February 7th, 2025, and our friend Pepe Escobar is back with us. Welcome back, Pep.
Always a pleasure, Nima. Your smile is a ray of sunshine.
Let's get started, Pepe, with what has happened in the United States in terms of the
Oh
situation
my
in the
God.
Middle East and Donald Trump. To some extent, I can say what he has said was some sort of surprise even for Netanyahu sitting next to him. What was happening in your opinion? The way that he was talking about removing people, Gazans, Palestinians from their land and sending them to other places in order to make new buildings or building Gaza for new people.
Well, Nima, we can say for sure that none of us have, as it stands, the full picture of what's really going on. There are many pieces in this jigsaw puzzle that don't make sense, and it's going to take a while to see the whole jigsaw puzzle in front of us. There are many aspects that were relatively predictable. This Gaza Riviera resort and casino operation, advertised by a real estate developer like Trump, was predictable, first of all, because it was already suggested to him personally on a family level by Jared Kushner over a year ago, in fact. Kushner now is even more dangerous than during Trump 1.0 because he's working in the background. So nobody knows exactly what he's up to, but we do know what he wants for Gaza and for Palestine as a whole. And it's no wonder that Trump announced that's his idea. Can you imagine Kushner getting privileged access to Trump for months after months and drumming this idea? Look at the real estate possibilities, phenomenal location, seashore, let's build everything, etc. And Trump, of course, found a way to formalize it in a benign way. So this is the brutalist empire in the new configuration, but it's much more brutal than before, if that was possible. That's why I called it at the beginning benign brutalism. So this offer of the Riviera resort and casino in Gaza is the benign brutalism with an added component of destroying international law. And on top of it, which was the reaction all across the global south, the Arab world, the lands of Islam, the global majority, transforming a genocide into a harmless ethnic cleansing campaign and turning uh, lands that are expropriated illegally into this fabulous real estate operation. So, in itself, this is something that we haven't seen something like this in the 21st century. Well, we just saw, and it's not over yet, a genocide broadcast on every smartphone on the planet. This is something that we could never imagine, even what, 2 years ago. But there are, when we start digging into the motivations, it gets much more complicated. Okay, I'll offer a resume of what's behind Trump's offer. Essentially, Trump is proposing to Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and Qatar. Look, you have infinite building and developing opportunities in that fantastic Riviera. You can build anything you want. You bring your construction companies, especially Saudi, Qatari, and Emirates, especially Emad from the Emirates, for instance. You can build anything you want. You can do two or three Dubais side by side, but you have to pay. And pay who? Pay for American organization and protection. So there is a mafia element of the whole thing reminds us of several episodes on The Sopranos. And this is what's imbued in Trump saying, we'll own it. So basically, he's proposing this enormous expropriation where, he is inviting, his own words, inviting builders from all over. Basically, he was referring to these three from the Arab world. They build anything they want, but they have to pay for American protection, American organizations. And the crazy thing is the Americans don't own that land. So the Americans don't have legal rights to cede anything to these construction companies or uh, by the Gulf, Persian Gulf monarchies to build anything. So everything is illegal in the whole thing. But it was framed in a way, the brutalist, benign way, that he's doing a favor to the people in Gaza, where they're going to be relocated. How they're going to be located? Forcibly by the IDF. He didn't explain. And the IDF now is coming already with a plan to forcibly relocate the Palestinians to another seashore somewhere, or to Egypt, to Jordan, whatever. And now the Israeli Minister of Defense is already even listing European countries that could receive the Palestinians. We talked about Spain and Ireland, among others. So the whole thing not only is mind-boggling and appalling, but it's also illegal, because presupposes that the US can control this whole project. Maybe they will use, the Americans using the IDF to expel the Palestinians in Gaza, and then they take over everything. They grant the rights of exploitation to all these Arab constructors, and the Riviera is going to be what? An American territory. Obviously, no details so far. So the whole thing is, no wonder the reactions all across the world were more perplexity, condemnation, of course, but people were perplexed because it's still hard to see the basis, the legal basis, not to obviously there's no moral or ethical basis, but even the basic legal basis for something like this. But this is just the beginning, Nima. I think from now on we're going to start to get a little more detail, especially because the backlash is already on, and because Trump doesn't listen to anybody. He probably didn't expect that the backlash would be global, including the Arab vassals, including the Minister of Foreign Relations of Saudi Arabia, including Egypt and Jordan, not to mention BRICS, ASEAN, Minister of Foreign Relations of Russia, Lavrov this week here in Moscow, Minister of Foreign Relations of China, you name it, all over. But, and obviously the backtrack includes, this is a president thinking outside the box. No, he's thinking outside the box, but he wants this implemented. He actually believes in this plan. And he actually believes that this is a solution outside of the box. And on top of it, a benign solution, because it will save the remaining Palestinians in Gaza. So this is just the beginning, Nima.
The way that Netanyahu was reacting to Donald Trump was so interesting. His body language, his nonverbal actions, and when Donald Trump said what would be his plan for Gaza, Netanyahu, I don't know if you saw that Netanyahu, in response to one of the reporters, said that we don't want Gaza to be capable of attacking us again. But
Exactly.
Donald Trump sees far ahead of that. His plan is far ahead of what we're talking about. It seems that in the mind of Netanyahu, it was totally unrealistic talking that way. Even somebody like Netanyahu didn't find it realistic. How do you see, do you think that the way that Netanyahu sees the changes that Donald Trump is talking about is that in the future, the United States would capture Gaza, would be under the control of the United States, and maybe Israel doesn't have anything to do with that. They can be there, but they're not going to be in charge of Gaza. How is that?
Netanyahu, Nima, he doesn't see that long in the future for several reasons. One, his number one preoccupation is not uh, to go to jail after the fall of this current government, which is something that would probably happen. Number two, his house is very, very messy. He travels with three doctors all the time with him. So he's only looking at the very, very short term. Oh, I have this enormous victory here uh, in front of the president of the United States. He's doing what I want, and I can go back to Tel Aviv and sell it to, in fact, that cabinet of cycles in Tel Aviv, which is he already did. So the government essentially, this current government essentially is not collapsing yet. But obviously, the devil in the details is what is not spelled out, and obviously, what when he start paying close attention, he won't like it because if Trump follows up on what he said and basically what he imposed on Netanyahu, the Israelis will have to follow the whole ceasefire project, and that will eventually lead to the end of this war. They cannot use or they cannot come up with a new offensive or go to Gaza again and kill another 50,000, 100,000 Palestinians. No, the Americans are going to say, no way. You have to follow the ceasefire. Then that's the end of the war. Then we build my reconstruction, which I, Trump, will supervise. And then we start building the new Riviera. So the Israelis, in all that, they will have the role of spectators if we follow Trump's reasoning. Because basically, their task now is to get to the end of the war. They won't get rid of Hamas, obviously. That's why Trump already was thinking maybe we'll have to send troops or maybe not. And the Pentagon said, no, no, we won't send anything. We're going to have to discuss. Obviously, they started with the diversionist tactics. But this will be a process that would be theoretically totally controlled by Washington. And the Israelis will be just watching the whole thing. So Netanyahu may be thinking, what's in it for me? Not much. You're going to be under control of Trump all the way. And if you try anything, not, in fact, inside the box, which is what the IDF usually does, the IDF is a killing machine, essentially, and not respect the timeline for the ceasefire, the second stage, third stage, and end the war, they will be in deep trouble with Trump. This is supported by the key fact that Trump not only does not trust Netanyahu, but he despises him. There's a personal element in all that, which is very, very important. So these first interpretations that were saying Netanyahu laid out a trap for Trump, it may be the other way around. And this is something that I discussed extensively this week with our friends Alistair Crook and Professor Marandi. On Wednesday night, we had a long dinner, and Alistair's position, which I am certain he's going to flesh out in detail in his next podcast and in his first article beginning of next week, now that he's back, he's coming back to Europe, is going to try to put together the missing pieces of this very complex jigsaw puzzle. And it's not what it's. To quote Twin Peaks once again, the owls are not what they seem. And so this can be a straight play by Trump, totally oblivious to the reaction of the rest of the world. Okay, partially true, but also a very, very clever move to have his own way so he can sell to the rest of the planet that he solved the Israeli-Palestinian problem with his own solution. So I think we have two vectors running in parallel. And we have no idea how this is going to play out, of course. In terms of revulsion of public opinion, we saw it this past few days. The revulsion is planetary. But this, Trump doesn't pay attention to that, of course. And don't forget that in this first few weeks of his new administration, he is shooting all over the place. This is really a shootout, not at the end of the old Westerners, but right at the beginning. The Westerner this time starts with a major shootout, and there's only one guy shooting. Everybody else is running, you know, trying to get shelter somewhere.
Pepe, how do you find that Donald Trump is trying to buy time in order to keep this ceasefire going on? Because they know that Netanyahu wants to get back in Gaza and continue that sort of attacks. Here comes the question: with this new strategy, if this is a strategy on the part of Donald Trump, how long they can keep Netanyahu out of Gaza and not letting them attacking people in Gaza? Because
Uh,
it's not
Sorry.
just about Netanyahu. We have various parties involved in that conflict. We have Houthis from Yemen, we have Hezbollah, we have Hamas, all of them together, Iraqis, Iran somehow involved in that the conflict. This is not a simple problem to deal with, but Donald Trump's manner in order to deal with that, it's so simplistic to us,
Mhm,
but it may have, because when he's talking about removing people from Gaza after 15 months of what
mhm,
has happened in Gaza,
mhm,
and it's unbelievable. Nobody would believe that. And I don't believe that Donald Trump is talking, he's honest about what he's talking about. He has some sort of agenda. Then that would be our part to understand what would be that sort of understanding on his part to avoid Israel, or at the same time convincing, I don't know, Arab states to some sort of solution for the conflict. How do you see, as you mentioned, it's so complex, the situation. And
mhm. Yeah, coming back to what we were talking a few minutes ago, Nima. The number one short-term objective of Trump is to rein in Netanyahu, is to box Netanyahu inside, fulfilling the promise of the ceasefire all the way, which would lead to the end of the war. And this is something we could see by the body language of Netanyahu at the White House and the smirks that he only got the first part of the message, the hot part, the, the heat of the moment. But after that, if he starts thinking about it, he see that he's now totally boxed in by Trump. He's going to have to fulfill the terms of the ceasefire, and that will lead to something that he does not want by any means, which is the end of the Israel Hamas war. And then the American process starts. That's why what many of us have been examining this past 2 or 3 days, that this is a very carefully laid out trap. This is probably the privileged scenario at the moment. We still don't know. What we do know is if Netanyahu if he tries to break the ceasefire or not fulfill the terms to the end, Trump is going to fall over him like a ton of bricks. That's for sure. So we only know for sure about the short term objectives. Long term, we don't. And obviously, uh, how the Americans are who the Americans are going to give the task to expel the Palestinians from Gaza, we don't know. How they're going to convince the Arab construction companies to start building the Rivieras when they have no legal basis for it, we still don't know. But that's very, very far away. We should concentrate for the moment in the next few weeks and to see if the ceasefire will be respected. If it's broken, as you mentioned, the axis of resistance will be back full force, and they're ready for it. Not only from outside, but Hamas itself, which reconstituted itself in a record, and they are ready to roll again.
And many people don't understand what has happened in southern Lebanon. And in my understanding, Hezbollah, the main reason that Hezbollah tried to uh, uh, attack the northern part of Israel in favor of Gazans. And we had ceasefire in which that Israel didn't decide to abide
Did,
by.
didn't
Yeah,
respect. Yes.
yeah. And but Hezbollah didn't do anything. They were
Hmm.
coordinating with the government in Lebanon because of Gaza, in my opinion. They didn't attack again Israel because they were seeing what is happening in Gaza and the possibility of having some sort of talks and the future for negotiations in Gaza. That's why they didn't attack Israel. Here comes, if something goes wrong in Gaza, we can have again all of them together attacking Israel. Here,
Absolutely.
this
But
is the
that's
main doubt I think in the mind of Trump.
yes. I would not say he knows personally, but at least some people around him probably explained to him that if Israel breaks the ceasefire agreements, there will be a concerted attack by the axis of resistance, which probably, from the point of view of getting Netanyahu in even more trouble, would be welcomed by Trump 2.0. Because uh, there's an extreme, I would say, radical dichotomy between Trump paying allegiance and owing favors to his Zionist donors in Washington, the Beltway, New York, etc., and abiding by anything that Netanyahu decides to do. It's a completely different thing. He's not a cheerleader of Netanyahu or this current psycho government in Tel Aviv. He obviously has to follow directives by his mega donors of the Miriam Adelson type. That's different. So, in between, there is some margin of maneuver because he can get to what he considers his objectives without having to rely on the Israeli government, which is probably the number one feature of this theoretically totally demented Riviera plan, in fact.
The other point that Trump was talking about was the negotiations with Iran. When he was talking about the United States plan to talk on the nuclear program, on some sort of negotiations and JCPOA and some sort of that sort of negotiations with Iran, Netanyahu wasn't that much comfortable with what Donald Trump was talking about. Even he mentioned that that there he again emphasized that their main enemy is Iran and we have to keep an eye on Iran and all of that. How is
Mhm.
that going to? But Trump wants, as he mentioned, immediately talking with Iranians and making new deal. How is that going to play out in Donald Trump's plan, in your opinion? Is Netanyahu going to influence him on that issue, or he has made his mind and he's gonna go after what he's talking about?
He doesn't care what Netanyahu thinks about Iran being the larger enemy, the only enemy, evil, whatever. This is bullshit. Trump wants to pose as a peacemaker again. We should not forget that he destroyed the original JCPOA. So he wants Trump's JCPOA 2.0, right? And he keeps carping on, will never allow Iran to develop a nuclear bomb. Everybody knows that, but this is not the point. The point is if, and I would not bet on this if, some of his foreign policy advisors have already explained to him, first of all, the importance of the Russia Iran strategic partnership. Second, the fact that Iran is totally integrated in this BRICS sphere. especially Russia, Iran, and India, geoeconomic and geopolitical. Third, that if there was ever an Israeli attack, which can only happen with the Americans totally involved or 80% involved, logistics, weapons, etc., the Iranian response will be devastating. And Iran has means of an asymmetrical response against Israel that can be really, really hardcore. So we cannot expect people around Trump to be telling him that. I'll give an example. For instance, his negotiator on Ukraine, General Kellogg, is revealing himself to be an absolute idiot. Everything that he has been saying that what's going to be possibly proposed in a first meeting with Putin, telephone, and then later, ceasefire, peacemakers, demilitarized zone, etc. The Russians have already said over and over and over again, no, that's not it. So it's not going to work from the start. So his stupidity is already sabotaging even the first phone call to phone call or personal encounters. So on Iran is even worse because Trump is surrounded by hardcore Ziocons all around him. So nobody is giving him the full picture of the geopolitical, geoeconomic, and military integration, not to mention the military power per se of Iran uh, vis-a-vis the other BRICS members. So Trump, in his once again simplistic way, is using good old tactics. I'm gonna reduce their oil exports to zero, which is something that he cannot do by any chance. And if he does, the global oil market will be in total disarray, and oil will go to 150, maybe $200 a barrel. So he cannot do that. Second, even if he did, Iran's Asian customers would continue to buy Iran energy. And Russia will continue to invest in the upgrade of the Iranian energy infrastructure. So, okay, so he threatens, I'm going to sanction to death again, or you cannot export it. And then he backtracks and says, oh, no, I would like to have a deal. But this is pure Trump. First, the mega threat. Then he backs off and he offers a deal. So this is how you. This is Trump's negotiating tactics, which I was always. In fact, I've been playing around with that. I would love to take Trump to a carpet bazaar in Iran or in Turkey and put him in front of one of those ultra pros and see if he can get a Trump deal with one of these guys who are mega pros. He would not. In the end, he will have to accept the win-win deal proposed by the carpet guy in the Istanbul Bazaar on the Isfahan Bazaar. And that's why they are so good. They have been doing this for millennia, and they know how to do it. And the Trump tactic is very crude and frankly counterproductive. You cannot start a negotiation by insulting or demeaning your partner. And that's what he does. In this case of trying to go for JCPOA 2.0, he starts by insulting, humiliating, and demeaning Iran. And then he offers something, saying the Iranians are going to be so glad that I'm offering that. That's not how it works.
Yeah, today, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, he said that holding talks with the United States is neither smart nor wise, and experience has proven that. Today, he said that.
It's a very measured formulation, Nima. Very, very measured. Basically saying we cannot discuss with these barbarians and under their terms on top of it, because this is not diplomacy. That's exactly what the Supreme Leader has said.
And we know that we have two forces in Iran. One of them is more optimistic about the West, and the other one is so much pessimist, and they don't want any sort of talk with the West because from the experience they had with the West, that wasn't so much positive in their mind. Here
Mhm.
comes the question. This government, Pezeshkian and his team, is trying to manage the situation in Iran and outside Iran. On the other hand, Trump tried to humiliate somehow Iranians, as you've mentioned, and on the other hand, here is the good offer for you. He
Mhm.
did the same with Russia. If you since he took power,
Exactly.
if you
Exactly.
look at the manner, his manner, he's doing the same with Russia as well. He is he going? Do you really believe that he's gonna? Because there has to be some sort of understanding on the internal affairs in Iran, because it's not all
Mhm.
about the United States. Donald Trump wants to negotiate, okay, 50% of the deal. How about the other 50% of the deal?
Mhm.
He has to make the position of the government in Iran in, because the way that he's talking about the Iran and Russia, the, he's not putting the government in a good position to negotiate with. This is the problem with Donald Trump.
Let me just return it a little bit and pose the first question to you, Nima. How do you see Khamenei's conditions to a return of negotiations with Trump 2.0? What will be the number one parameter to be respected, assuming the Iranian government would get the go ahead? Okay, start talking.
The main, as I know from first agreement JCPOA, one of the main issues in Iran that we're talking about this vastly was the that the United States wasn't implementing all of the articles mentions in that agreement. Obama tricked Iranian. He didn't do anything. He didn't, almost he deceived Iranian. They're
Mm,
talking this way. He did that. And right now, that's why the leader, supreme leader of Iran, is saying that it's not wise to negotiate again with Iranian. You have to remember what they did in the first negotiations that we did with them with JCPOA. Here,
absolutely.
this is a substantial concern on the part of Iranian. Is the United States going to abide by the agreement? Who's going to be the next president of the United States? Is it because it was Obama, and right after Obama, Donald Trump came and said, "I don't agree with that."
Mm,
And what's that all about? You have to have some sort of continuity in the manner that you have with all of you. You can make a deal, and the other day say, I don't agree on that at all. This is the problem with the United States. It's not all about Iran. Russia is talking the same way.
of course.
And here is the question for Donald Trump and for the administration, for the blob, for whoever is the decision maker in the United States. Are they going to abide by the agreement that they make? Are they going to say, as we see in Taiwan?
Absolutely correct,
This is the
Nima. And
problem with the United States.
it's fascinating because the supreme leader is basically saying what Lavrov has been saying for over a year. The United States is non agreement capable. This is the best definition for decades of American foreign policy. The Russians learned it directly. The Iranians learned it directly with what happened with the JCPO, the first JCPOA. I remember very well. I was in Vienna in 2015 during the negotiations, and we were getting briefings, daily briefings by the Iranian delegation, and they were at the time led by Zarif. Zarif and Kerry were on the table, right? And the Iranians were telling us every day, look, the Americans are putting roadblock after roadblock all the time when we had already agreed to paragraphs, to footnotes, right? And then they come up with something the next day. So even during the redaction of the final agreement, they were blocking it, and they kept blocking afterwards, or they didn't implement it. They didn't respect it, and they didn't implement it until the next president came and destroyed the agreement completely. So obviously, the supreme leader and every Iranian government understood perfectly that it's in the end it's absolutely useless to try to have a deal apparently set in stone and approved and ratified by the United Nations, which is the case of JCPOA 1.0. It doesn't matter. Non-agreement capable, as Lavrov said. Minsk, okay, the US was not directly related to Minsk. The Europeans played the American way. They never implemented Minsk. So, what would be the catalyst? What a Trump action that would make now this new Iranian government reconsider? Okay, let's sit on the same table and discuss. There is nothing they can offer, especially because the negotiation tactics continue to be the same. They issue one threat or a lot of threats, and then they say, oh, maybe we can have a deal. They're not going to change their attitude. And knowing what we know about Trump, he's not going to change his modus operandi. So it looks like this new negotiation is already a non-starter. Unless we could have, for instance, a mediator. Let's imagine the possibility of having a sort of mini BRICS council mediating the US talking to Iran. So this would mean, let's say, involvement of Russia, China, and India as BRICS members, considering that Iran is also a top BRICS member. This is a possibility. Obviously, the Americans will say, oh, no, this is skewed. No, we want one-on-one, because they know that one-on-one they can impose, or, or like a pigeon in the chessboard, they step on the chessboard and get rid of all the pieces. So the elements for in-depth dialogue between Washington and Tehran, they are not there at the moment. And we wonder if there will ever be.
And the question, Pepe, is not about negotiations. And many people are in the mainstream media, what would be the main articles in the negotiations? But this is not the problem. This is the day. What Iranians are concerned about, as far as I know, is that what would happen the day after negotiations?
Exactly.
What would happen? And if there is no outcome, why why do we need to negotiate with the United States?
And who's going to guarantee? Even we all know the UN is toothless. The UN is incapable of guaranteeing anything. So this let's consider a sort of proposal. If there was a sort of BRICS group that would guarantee the implementation of a deal. And obviously, the Americans won't, first of all, because Trump is already at war with BRICS as a whole, right? So this won't fly. Nobody else, if we look at the geopolitical chessboard, nobody else could act as a mediator between the US and Iran if they sit on the table again. And Iran has all the background and all the motives to look at the possibility of sitting at the table and say, this is not going to work, because they won't respect it. And everybody else outside of Iran already knows that.
And about the shifting the gear to the conflict in Ukraine, you've mentioned Keith Kellogg, and we know
Yeah.
that next week they're gonna present their plan for the conflict in Ukraine in the Munich
At the
Security
Munich
Conference.
Security Conference.
Why is that, Pepe? Why
Why,
they're not
why
talking
the
directly
why
with Russia? Who's the Munich Security Conference
Oh,
in?
Munich Security Conference, because it's don't forget that this is where in 2007 Putin said that your unilateral order, we don't agree with it, and that's it. We're going to fight it. That's one thing. Number two, the whole of what I call NATO stand gathers at the Munich Security Conference. So all the NATO stand representatives will be there, political and military. And three, it's in terms of these international gatherings, he has a very high profile to announce something that would pose as a deal, would not be the offering of a deal. It will be something that will be an ersatz or a fictional deal, especially considering everything that has been leaked already and everything that Kellogg himself has already said is a known starter. And the Russians have already found ways to transmit to Trump 2.0 that if you offer this, you better not even come. So comes back to the key point, Nima, which is the overarching uh, problem and drama of how Trump can possibly negotiate what is de facto an absolutely horrendous defeat, not only of the US, but the whole of NATO against Russia in Ukraine, and pose as a winner for American public opinion and for large parts of the world, especially Europe, because Europe is fighting this war side by side with the Americans. We all know it's impossible. And Emmanuel Todd, when he formulated that a few weeks ago, that was the best synthetic, concise explanation of Trump's job. Trump's job is to manage the defeat of the US vis-a-vis Russia. It's impossible. And Trump doesn't even know how to do it. And even if he knew that if he managed to pull it off, he would be consumed internally, especially by a deep state, against which he is at war as we speak, progressing day by day. So he is in an inviolable position, to say the least, diplomatically. He's in an impossible position. And on top of it, he has absolutely nothing to offer. His hand is very weak. He has nothing to offer Russia. And Russia, wait and see strategy, as we discuss. We have been discussing in Moscow this week. Yesterday, for instance, I was at a master class of a top Putin advisor, and there were a lot of businesses. This guy is the key link between Putin and big business, big corporation, and small entrepreneurs as well. And I was asking as many as I could, and it's more or less 50-50. Some of them think that Russia could decide the war in the next 3 months. And the others say, no, this will go on all the way through 2025, all the way to 2026, because the West will continue to weaponize Kiev to the max with everything that they have and they don't have. So it's complicated because when we consider all that and the impossibility of Trump to offer anything that would entice the Russians to start thinking different ways, it's impossible because the conditions established by Putin are very, I wouldn't say strict. They are strict from a Western point of view, but they are rational. No more Nazified Ukraine, like this bunch in power in Kiev, demilitarized Ukraine, neutral Ukraine, um, a state that can have state to state decent diplomatic relations with Russia, end of the sanctions, which obviously would be practically impossible for the West to agree. And that's it. And obviously, everything that was conquered on the battlefield stays with Russia. So, can you imagine President of the United States saying yes to all these conditions? We all know it's absolutely out of the question. So, he's going to try to haggle. And if he offers, for instance, ceasefire, line of control, peacekeeping, etc., the Russians, no, this is ridiculous. This is not the end of the war. We want the end of it. And Putin says this practically every week now. We want the end of the war, not a procrastination or a pause that will allow Ukraine and NATO to remilitarize themselves. So this, from the American point of view, is also anathema. They don't want to hear that. But this is reality. These are hard facts. This is what's happening in the battlefield. So we can all see how Trump he's facing a wall that the previous administration built for the West and for himself. And he cannot break through this wall.
And how about the presidential election in Ukraine? Because Russians are so much concerned about, because they don't want to negotiate. Don't want Zelensky to
Because
be.
it's an illegal system, Nima. It's not that they don't want to. Putin said, look, we have nobody to negotiate with because this current setup is completely illegal, and it is. So you need elections. Obviously, free and fair elections in Ukraine is wow. It's easier to spot an alien, over here. Uh, but that will be one of the conditions established by the Russians to have somebody to talk to in Kiev. Obviously, this is something that Trump 2.0 can do, and they're already working on it. The number one candidate in the case of having elections would be Western support for Zelensky. He's already there. In fact, he's being groomed by the Brits to be the next president of Ukraine. The thing is how to force this criminal sweatshirt in Kiev to accept to have elections, which he knows there will be. Obviously, he will lose. If he runs, he will lose badly. And then after that, the Russians will go after him too, in terms of criminal pursuit, because he will be pursued as a war criminal by Russia. That's a completely different ballgame, you know.
Sergei Lavrov, the day before yesterday, said that the foreign policy of Russia is experiencing huge changes. And because in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, they tried to get closer to the West, which wasn't possible. And
Mhm.
after all, we had the war in Ukraine, the conflict in Ukraine. Do you think that they're reconsidering their foreign policy in Russia? And because the
You
way
mean
that Russia sees Africa right now,
Russia
and
reconsidering its own foreign
yeah,
policy?
its own foreign policy toward the West.
No, 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 because from the Russian point of view, Putin, Minister of Foreign Relations, etc., it's an aggressive policy by the collective West, and Russia is basically reacting and defending itself. And if we look at what's been happening since the start of the SMO nearly 3 years ago, that these are the facts. Absolutely. The West threw everything against Russia, and Russia managed not only to survive, but to thrive and to have a very powerful economy. Of course, we were discussing this yesterday night. There are problems with the Russian economy. Interest rates are very high, but there's full employment. There's no unemployment in this country. You see the middle classes here in Russia thriving, which is the absolute opposite of Europe. That's one of the good things of living between Europe and Russia. You come from here, you arrive here, and say, "Wow, this is a place that works, clean. Everybody is fully employed, beautiful lights everywhere." And when you compare to the absolutely gloomy landscape all across Western Europe, it's very striking and unexpected. We'll never expect this to happen after 3 years of war. So Putin and the Security Council and Russian public opinion, their instinctive feeling is that we're doing the right thing. So there's nothing to change. And on top of it, we are expanding all our interconnections with the global south, with the global majority via BRICS, Eurasia Economic Union, relations with China, relations with the ASEAN, relations in Africa, in Latin America, etc. So the directives of and the guidelines of Russian foreign policy will remain the same. And now they're starting to look at Trump 2.0, and we can say there's a feeling of a perplexity again. They were expecting that this would be more rational than the previous administration. But now it's different because this change of paradigm, in fact, is leading us to a system of uncontrolled chaos. And obviously, chaos launched, fomented, or exploited, or all of the above by Washington. And and in terms of what really matters for the Russian leadership, which is to find a solution for the Ukraine tragedy, and they are concentrated on it. And they say this is our war, and we need to solve it our way. That's it. They are not going to deviate from the guidelines that have been exposed over and over again since June last year by Putin. So try to have this new American administration understand that, Nima, and understand the implications and all that, and understand that the cohesiveness of the Russian position. It's impossible for them. They can't. And it's culturally inapprehensible because it involves understanding Russian culture, involving how Russia deals with the perennial threat coming from the West, century after century, and all
I think
that.
the
Impossible.
I think, Pepe, with what has happened in Ukraine, you'd look at China, look at Russia. It's not the way that it was before the conflict in Ukraine started. You look at
Yeah.
BRICS. It's all these monsters, these huge political animals came out. They cannot get back to their position before the conflict in Ukraine started.
No, they can't.
They want to
Exactly.
play their role, and the United States doesn't seem that they can understand that the situation has totally changed on the part of these countries, and they cannot get back to the same position that Donald Trump was in his first term.
They still don't understand what BRICS is about, Nima. How can they possibly understand what's going on in a great deal of the global majority? Trump and the people he appointed, the people around him, have no idea about what BRICS is doing, what BRICS represents, the interconnection among the top BRICS players, the fact that every country that matters in the global south wants to be part of BRICS, how they are getting new partners all the time, and they're going to get more partners this year, later this year. This is incomprehensible. And not only for Trump and his advisors, but Washington as a whole. This ecosystem in Washington is a very limited provincial parochial place. You know, it's and although there are some interesting and decent IQs around, the level is very, very low. And when it comes to understanding the world outside of the bubble, it's a total disaster. So the complexity of what BRICS is organizing, especially all the way to the summit in Kazan last year, what Kazan put on the table in terms of this is what we should do from now on and all that. Very, very few people in this ecosystem in the East Coast in the US, they understand that. Very, very few. And if they understand a little bit, they dismiss it, obviously, which is obviously the argument of fools everywhere. When you don't understand anything, you dismiss it or ignore it. So the possibilities of a dialogue are very, very slim. And especially now with an administration where everything depends on the mood of the leader. And everything that depends on what kind of a tweet X is going to launch defending his actions. So, we're not talking about Bismarck here. We're not talking about Talleyrand, great diplomacy. No, forget it. It's a long-running reality show with peaks, audience peaks, very bombastic solutions, bombastic cliffhangers, non sequiturs, subplots that we have no idea where they are going. It's a reality show. It's not a presidency. And the Russians, as you know, they are very reality based. How they're going to deal with that?
If we consider this 10% tariff on China as the first step of Donald Trump to attack BRICS. Here is what they were talking about, a Canadian businessman on Fox News talking about the way that he thinks about these 10% of tariffs on China.
Mm.
There's 10% tariff salvo. China sees room to negotiate. Here's what President Trump said about China yesterday.
What I have discussed is we'll have some good meetings with China. We have meetings planned, and we'll see what happens. But that was just an opening salvo. If we can't make a deal with China, then the tariffs will be very, very substantial.
So Mexico and Canada were obviously motivated to try to get to a deal with President Trump yesterday, and they got a 30-day pause. Do you think President Xi is of similar mind?
No, I don't. I think China's a completely unique situation, very different than Mexico, very different than Canada. China, since 1999, when they joined the WTO, has never abided by the rules in any single year, and they certainly don't abide by IP law. And clearly, the fentanyl issue has been outstanding for years. In addition to that, from a manufacturing point of view, a company we all know well, Apple, does a massive amount of manufacturing and job creation there. I think the China deal is far more complex and requires a lot more negotiation than a weekend of just suspending tariffs for 30 days. If U.S. companies never get IP reciprocality, this is an economic war that's unique. It's an AI war. It may become a military war one day. China is just completely different, and I think they need a lot more squeezing than just this. I'm surprised there's only 10%. I thought 400% would be a good place to start. It's just, you can't compare these three situations. They're all different, but China is a big, big, big problem, and I'm not sure this is going to be resolved on a weekend deal.
400% of tariffs. That would devastate. That would devastate people in the United States.
This venture capitalist, an absolute imbecile. This is the level of business in the US, people who pose as experts in trade wars, and obviously doesn't understand shit about China. And he goes even beyond the president, which is, okay, the usual Trump thing. Okay, I'm going to propose a deal. If they don't want it, I'm going to slap a zillion tariffs against them, which is the same thing that he said about Russia. So there's only one negotiating strategy, Anima, over and over again. Trump modus operandi is very predictable, And when you talk to business leaders like this absolute idiot, that's it. That's 400%. Okay. But look, it's so stupid that we should not even comment. But it's good to have an illustration of the ultra low level of not only discourse understanding, geoeconomic understanding of the role of China, and of course the usual demonization. The guy basically said that China copies everything.
Pepe, when you look at the USAID and the way that Donald Trump, they're talking about that they don't want this organization, but we know that they're bringing this organization under the control of the Secretary of State Rubio. How there are many concerns. They're talking about color revolutions, the dominance that this organization had on the media, mainstream media. They have paid many people in the mainstream media, many groups, NGOs in other countries to make color revolution in those countries. If they don't want that, the new administration doesn't want that sort of attitude. We know that Marco Rubio is so dangerous when it comes to Latin America, when it comes to Venezuela, Cuba, and this organization being under his control. What would that mean for us in Latin America? How do you see that? Is that are they really want to change the behavior of this organization, or they're gonna reshape it the manner they want to be?
Of course, this is reformatting, reshaping, repurposing, and they will have full control by the Department of State of everything that they do, which will basically be, in a nutshell, how to conduct hybrid war operations against their main targets all over the world, and the top targets are all BRICS nations. This is the headline for what's going on at USA. And maybe they will do something about the NED, which usually operates side by side with the US aid. If they don't do anything about the NED, this proves once again that this is a mere, cosmetic, second-hand makeup operation of USD, and they will continue to do what they always did. So this is a non-story to start with, absolutely. And everybody from the global south, all over Latin America, all over Africa, parts of Southeast Asia, Central Asia especially, and parts of West Asia should have no illusions that this is going to be more benign, let's put it this way, or magnanimous, or less like a bunch of infiltrators. Now it will continue the same way, but now it's even more lethal because it's under direct guidance of somebody like Marco Rubio, who wants basically destabilize most of Latin America as we know it.
Yeah. Here is what Marco Rubio said about Brazil. It's not just about Cuba and Venezuela.
Oh, he talked about Brazil. Oh,
in our hemisphere, largest country in the Western Hemisphere south of us, cut a trade deal with China. They're going to, from now on, do trade in their own currencies, get right around the dollar. They're creating a secondary economy in the world, totally independent of the United States. We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
At least Marco Rubio understands what the BRICS are doing, which is an enormous step ahead, isn't it, Nima?
Yeah.
He's at least, unlike Trump, he understands that the key issue is transacting in their own currencies among all the BRICS and BRICS partners as well. What the Department of State is going to do about that, and now including US aid, is the larger war against the BRICS. So expect all sorts of black ops and dirty ops against major BRICS countries, especially Brazil. Brazil is one of the top targets, but now conducted officially, and everybody knows where the orders are coming from. At least makes it obvious for everyone,
Yeah. Let's see what would happen under Trump. Vai ficar muito feio.
Vai ficar feio.
Exatamente.
For our audience, this is going to get very ugly.
Yeah, very ugly. Yeah, that's right. Muito obrigado, Pepe.
Obrigado a você, querido.
Grande abraço.
Só falamos de histórias de horror.
Aí.
To all of you, our audience, yes. This is a horror story show, in fact.
Exactly.
Well, let's keep fighting.
Yeah. See you soon, Pepe.
See you soon, Nima. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nima. Thanks, everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.